Hello, everybody, and welcome to our June episode of the QLAG interview podcast. Today, I have Scott Mitchell with me today, and I'm interviewing him. He lives in Macon, Georgia, down in the Southern Georgia Conference.
Hey everybody, my name's Scott Mitchell. I attend Centenary United Methodist Church here in Macon in the South Georgia Conference. I am a lay delegate this year to the South Georgia Annual Conference, if and when that ever happens. And I was a delegate to UMC Next out in Kansas City last year.
That's very good. How was UMC Next? I know that a lot of us have just curious about how it went because we weren't able to make it in person.
Okay, that's a very interesting question. So after the very first day, um, I went that night to the LGBT gathering, and I had such a good day. I'd met some wonderful people. Um, I was so hopeful about what the future looked like, and I went to the LGBT gathering that night and was confronted with some of the most angry voices I've ever heard in my life. The voices I heard that night were just as angry, if not more angry, than the anti-LGBT voices that I heard growing up with. And it scared me. It made me very, very, very sad. I went back to my hotel room that night and I cried for a good 2 or 3 hours. I couldn't believe that there was that much anger. And sometimes the anger even felt like the same kind of hatred that the people who don't accept me sometimes spew. And so for me, that was a really, really, really eye-opening experience because I am much more of a bridge builder. I am much more of how can we walk through this together? How can we figure this out? And I did not hear a lot of that in the room at that time. And so I prayed about it a lot that night. And the next morning, I was actually getting on the elevator, and I got onto the elevator with two of the people that actually led the event the night before. And so I got to talking to them on the way down the elevator, and actually after we got off the elevator, about what it is like for an LGBT person that's not living in an urban area. So I think a lot of times rural America gets left behind, and people forget that there are LGBT people in our churches across the South that don't have the opportunity to just throw our hands up and say, screw it, I'm going to go to this other big church that accepts me. And you have to go to the church that's in your community because it's the only one there. And so I was able to talk with them and share with them at least a different perspective of being LGBT in the Methodist Church. And so I'm not really one of those people that say God puts you in the places where you're supposed to be, but I really did feel like it at that moment.
Yeah, just I know there's a lot of anger and everything. It's very characteristic and very typical because there's just been so many years of suppression and bubbling emotions, and kind of getting those opportunities to speak really does draw that out. And I do really like how you talked about the contrast between those that are living in the cities and those that are living out in the country and in the rural areas. It's a very different experience
Right.
with that.
And I lived in Atlanta for many years, for like 11 or 12 years. And one thing I love about living in a southern rural area is here in Macon, I can just be Scott. When I lived in Atlanta, there's so much pressure to be gay all the time. Like, I mean, it's exhausting. You have to go eat at the gay restaurants and eat and then go to this place and that place. And here you can just be yourself, and none of that pressure is on you, which is an amazing feeling.
Yeah, yeah. There's definitely a lot of pressure, specifically because, when you live in the cities, you tend to feel more connected to like everything and everywhere. And so you hear about something happening, and you kind of just have this need to become a part of something, to kind of mobilize because you've got a lot of people around you, and it's just I feel like it's very different when you're even out in like the suburbs, which is where I live. It's like it's easier just to be who you are without being kind of pulled into the greater, I guess, cultural struggle that we're kind
Right.
of experiencing.
Exactly.
But yeah, it's very interesting. So I'm gonna ask now just a little bit about kind of your personal journey, about coming to terms with your identity, how faith played a role in that, and if the church was present or if it wasn't, in negative or positive ways, and just kind of give you an opportunity to share.
So I grew up in the Southern Baptist Church in a very, very small town. I grew up on a farm. Uh, Growing up, I was very, very involved in church. Um, I was actually the youngest person from my church to ever be allowed to go on a youth mission trip. I was 11, but because of my great faith, I was allowed to go, which is funny to me now. Uh, my favorite story about growing up in the Baptist church was there was a singer at the time called Carmen, and he had this song called The Champion. And The Champion was a song about, Jesus, killing Satan, yada, yada, yada. And I was on the drama team at church and I was chosen to play Jesus. And so you have to imagine I'm the youngest kid on the drama team for youth. I'm like 11. Everyone else is in high school. And here's little baby Jesus. It's me, like this little bitty 11-year-old, like at the end with my little arms spread out, and I'm the champion. And I knew then that I was gay. I also knew then that if I told anyone in my church family that I would never ever ever be allowed back in that church, and so that hurt my heart. And I spent a lot of years hiding who I was. I came out to some people in high school, and so this was 30 plus years ago, and it didn't go very well. So I kind of went out of the closet, back in the closet, and then in college, I had a similar experience. I joined a fraternity, and I was blackballed from the fraternity because they found out that I was gay. I had lots of messages throughout my life that being gay was not okay. And so, long story short, I started using drugs and alcohol to cope with life. I became a drug addict when I lived in Atlanta, and I was addicted to drugs for years. I'm now 15 and a half years clean. I have my entire life back, thanks to, my church family for sure. But I have an amazing husband. I have a family. I have two girls. They're wonderful. Yeah. So, yeah, I was always really strong in my faith growing up, to the detriment of myself, though. So, my faith growing up was much like the faith of those people around me. And if those people hated gay people, Scott hated gay people. If those people didn't like black people, Scott didn't like black people. Like I kind of assimilated to the culture that I was in, somewhat to survive, somewhat out of being a little naive. After high school, I lived in larger cities and I wasn't stuck in a very small town anymore. And so once you start getting outside of rural, small town America, your vision for your life and your the way you look at the world grows. And so I definitely see that in my life.
Yeah, I can relate definitely to, growing up around a certain, whether it's family or friends, growing up with that, they don't like, gay people, then I'm not gonna like them, and all that kind of bias that we just kind of get raised around, that we just think, this is normal, this is what I should think, and there's a part of us that's like, maybe this isn't necessarily right, but everyone around you, it's like it's pretty much the normal, and so you kind of just get used to that fact, and it's only kind of until you break out and meet other people and see different places that you kind of begin to question, like, well, I thought it was wrong, but everybody around me, it was pretty okay. But now that I've spread my wings and gone out a little bit, I'm finding out that I'm allowed to have those different opinions. I'm allowed to not agree with my friends at home or my family. And I also thought it was a little bit interesting. You mentioned the whole uh, playing as Jesus thing, and it was kind of a little bit funny to me because I actually, when I was in youth choir, we did a musical, and they cast me as Jesus as well, and I I don't know. It's always an awkward time. I wasn't out at the time, and if you would have asked me if I was gay, I would have said no, but I still very much was. I just wasn't admitting it to myself, and it's just
Right.
just I don't know. It's just very interesting that both of us were cast in such like a role that if we were to have come out, it would have been like a huge scandal or something like that. I just think that's very interesting. So I know that a lot has kind of happened across your life and your journey and everything. Could you give me a little bit more detail on, where exactly the church was during your time in Atlanta? Because I can imagine that you must have grown distant at some point or another, unless that's not the case. And kind
Right.
of if that happened and, how it happened and how you kind of came back.
So in college, when I started, especially when I started using drugs, I I really just I didn't go to church at all. So when I went away to college, I went down to Southern Mississippi. I got a scholarship, and gosh, I didn't even look. It's so bizarre to me now thinking back, because I'm the chair of the Wesley Foundation here in Macon, and so it's really funny looking back. When I went to college, I was so angry at the church I grew up in that I didn't even look for a church family there. Um, I I the In high school I started despising the church. Um, Growing up in a small town, most of the messaging around LGBT people at that time was extremely negative. There was nothing positive, um, nothing supportive at all whatsoever. Lots of hellfire and brimstone preaching, and so I just completely stopped going to church. I completely just cut off that part of my life. I still prayed. So, I mean, I still had a connection with God. I just did not have a connection with the church body or a church family. Um, and throughout probably the next, I would say at least probably 12 or 14 years, like I really just didn't do church at all. Um, in recovery, though, it's so funny how all this works. In recovery, recovery brought me back into church buildings. So most NA meetings are located inside churches, especially in Atlanta. So I went to St. Mark's to meetings there. I would go to all these churches to go to NA and AA meetings. And one of the rehab facilities that I was in, they required you to on Sunday for your meeting, you could either go to church or you could go to a regular NAAA meeting. And so I started choosing to go to church that day instead. And I really, really started connecting with people, getting some semblance of regular church attendance back in my life. So much so that, like, since that time, I pretty much attend church very regularly now. And that means something to me. For a long time, it didn't, because I equated church and even faith for a while there as a negative thing. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I think we definitely all gone through times, particularly in the LGBT community, where the church is just we get very tired of it.
Yeah.
We see the hypocrisy, we see everything in it, and we just get very, very sick and tired of it, and we tend to want to distance ourselves. A lot of times we do keep that spiritual connection. We keep praying. We know that God's around and He's there for us, but we still, it doesn't stop us from getting very, sick of the church itself, just kind of as an institution. And I experienced that recently over the past, half a year, just kind of, especially with being involved in conference stuff and watching votes happen and debates. You just kind of get very sick of it, and you kind of have to take a healthy break. I think as long as you're keeping your spirituality intact, you take a healthy break away from that, and you come back and kind of get re-involved in the local level, and you start kind of reconnecting there, where there's not as much large debate and all sorts of crazy decisions being made.
Right. And I think that's one of the reasons why it hurts me. It hurts me in my heart to see LGBT people so angry sometimes, because like the older I get, the more I try to reach across the aisle, so to speak, and realize that you do sometimes, get more flies with honey, and how can we? I don't ever want to treat someone the way that I've been treated. I don't ever want to give that back to people. I would much rather show them what I believe is the love of God by being the person I wish they would be to me.
That makes a lot of sense. And of course, with everything going on right now, specifically within the Methodist Church, it's very important that we remember each other in our local communities and stay connected with those, because at the end of the day, whether the Methodist Church is here in some form or not tomorrow, your local
Right.
church is always really going to be there.
Right. And I love people. There are people in my life that I absolutely adore that don't think like me and don't believe like me and don't agree with me on everything. And I believe that that's okay. I think the world would be pretty damn boring if we were all the same and everybody looked the same and acted the same and believed the same. And I mean, do I agree with some of the stuff that they believe? No, but I'm not going to let myself hate them for that. And I have seen in my life that when I am my true authentic self and show people that regardless of that stuff that I'm going to love you, that truly speaks much more volumes and does more good than you can ever do by screaming and yelling in anger. Yeah, so that's kind of like my stance on that, and that's kind of like why I feel that way.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Um, so we're kind of wrapping up now, but I do want to give you an opportunity to talk about anything, or say something, add something on. If there's anything you want to say now regarding really anything.
Okay, I have something. So, um, really cool thing about Macon that people listening outside of here may not know. Last year, I was one of the organizers of Macon Pride, and if you want to see what a beautiful small town in Middle Georgia looks like, look no further than Macon. We had all every single different faith community out there show up at Pride with booths supporting Macon Pride. We had so many free mom hugs and free dad hugs and free grandma hug people there that there were more of them than there were LGBT people, which was really great. It is such a beautiful, supportive community, and to see the Methodist Church here too, just embrace and grab hold and show love to people, it just blows my mind. I can't tell you how lucky I am to live in a place like Macon, where people look at you and don't judge you for who you are, and allow you to be yourself, and allow you to oh my gosh, so many things, like allow you to be a okay. So I can share this. So most of my life, until I found Centenary United Methodist Church, I would go to the altar for communion, and I would take the bread and drink the juice, and I would go to the altar and I would pray that God would forgive me for being gay. And 6 years ago, when I found Centenary, this was the very first time in my life that I truly can now go to the altar and thank God for making me exactly who I am. And I found that in a small town in Middle Georgia. I didn't find that in Atlanta when I lived there. I didn't find that in New Orleans or New York. I found that in Macon, Georgia. And that's a really beautiful thing. That is a gift that this city has given me, that this church here in Macon has given me, that I never found anywhere else. And you don't know what a blessing that is until you found it.
Yeah, I think that's also a difference, kind of when talking at the beginning, between kind of the urban and rural areas. I feel like, especially out in rural areas, while it might be more difficult to find that perfect community, once you found it, I think it's very easy to kind of keep it together and kind of find your safe space to kind of just live your life and be yourself.
Right.
Well, I want to say thank you for
Yeah.
sitting down with me today and talking with me. All right, everyone, thank you for tuning into our June episode with our special guest today. It's really great that we've been able to kind of interview people from all around Georgia and Florida. I would like to thank Scott Mitchell again for sitting down for the month of June.
Thank you.
And I hope everyone's doing well as we continue to weather this pandemic and so much more. But thank you, everyone. And as always, you can find us on Facebook at QLAG UMC. Give us a like, and you can find our videos as published on YouTube.